But this guy, he wrote a book on peak oil back in the early part of the decade. But as the price of oil was ramping up to $147 in June of 2008, the guy was championing peak oil, saying, peak oil, we're about to tip over the edge. We really need to start thinking about what we're going to be doing in terms of alternatives. But when the price crashed from 147 down to 35, I think this guy had an epiphany. And I think he realised that peak oil was the political construct that it is. And he couldn't fight it from within, so he just decided to move out. And what he did was he effectively moved away from investment banking in the oil industry, and he focused his efforts on establishing a company called the Ocean Energy Institute, whose primary objective was to build wind farms off the coast of Maine, his home state. And his goal was that by the year 2020, all of Maine's electricity would come from offshore wind farms. So I believe that the guy actually was promoting, believing that, my God, if we can run out of oil fairly quickly, then we can get onto the clean energy stuff. But when he realised that actually he was just being taken for a sucker, he couldn't really go back and fight it because he was a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, and the Council on Foreign Relations is very definitely hydrocarbon driven. So he just went off and did his own thing. But after the BP Deepwater Horizon incident, this guy decided enough was enough. And he became one of the most vociferous critics on US television about BP and the federal government. And basically he was going on TV and saying everything that I was putting out in newsletters. He had a much bigger audience, of course. And because he was pretty well known in the US, because he was the one of the guys putting out this hypothesis of peak oil, he got quite a following. And he was challenging the veracity of BP's claims about the amount of oil that was pumping out, about their clean-up efforts. He was challenging the claims that the federal government were actually doing everything they could to help. When that you saw that Senate snippet, and that was from June, and Matthew Simmons was the guy who went on American TV and said this is a joke. So all of a sudden Matthew Simmons was no longer a friend of the oil industry. No longer was he not a friend, he was a very vocal non-friend. Now the only thing that Matthew Simmons and I really disagreed with after the Deepwater Horizon disaster occurred was this, because he was one of the proponents of dropping a nuclear vice down the well to seal it. Now the only time this has ever been done was in 1973 by Russia with a gas well, and why do you think they've never done it since? They're still paying the price. But apart from that, Matthew Simmons and I were very much of accord. Now, July the 23rd, I said that was a very significant date. Not only was it the day that I recorded this presentation, but it was the day that all shipping was removed from the Gulf of Mexico because of the imminent arrival of Tropical Storm Bonnie. Now this is fairly common practice that when there's a storm coming in, all the shipping is told to get into port, get out the Gulf, all the rigs are evacuated, the storm blows, does its damage, everyone goes back to work. Well, this time, you remember that up until that moment there were live feeds coming from the robo cameras beneath the seabed, and you could actually go onto the BP website and you could actually watch the oil gushing out of the well. Well, obviously on July 23rd, when all the shipping was removed, then the live feed stopped. Well, when all the shipping started to return, BP worked a piece of magic. Because before the cameras could get back underwater, before any of the ships could get back to there, BP announced that they had managed to put their 400-ton top hat and lower it onto the top of the well, and they were now effectively taking all the oil that was coming out of the gushing well and recovering it. Well, Matthew Simmons questioned this. He said, how the hell did these guys get back so quickly? How the hell could they get in there, drop this 400-ton device on top of the well, secure it, get it operational before any other shipping, and not least the cameras, return to the well? Then Matthew Simmons spotted something quite remarkable. You remember I told you that they had lost the first well on this rig. Well, this was the rig they lost, the well they lost was known as Well A. Okay? And here's the lambda coordinates, which is effectively the global positioning. Here's the lambda coordinates of that well. Okay? Now, Well B, the well that had blown, was on exactly the same location. So the rig was in exactly the same location. Okay? But what you've got to remember here is that it's basically in 5,000 feet of water, so it's not too difficult to actually sort of drill a second well without the rig moving. So here's the lambda coordinates from the second well. Well, Matthew Simmons did a double take, and he realised that, sure enough, before July the 23rd, the lambda coordinates were showing in the live feed cameras correctly, because they were in the top left-hand corner of the camera feed. Then when Matthew Simmons went back and took a look at the live feed that BP had hooked up after July the 23rd, he noticed that the lambda coordinates were of the well that had been shut in before they'd even started drilling this well. So Matthew Simmons went on Bloomberg television and said, look, this is outrageous. BP, they're lying to us again. They haven't capped the well. The well is still gushing out. They are just trying to lead people to believe that the well has been capped, because they've put the cameras on the well that was shut in before this well was even starting to drill. 1 week later, no previous known history, no previous known underlying health conditions. But Simmons' body, this is the newsletter I put out on the Thursday. I put it out on the Thursday, he died on the Sunday, the reports hit the media on the Monday, and then something else happened on the Wednesday, which I'll tell you in a second. But this is from the local media. Simmons' body was found Sunday night in his hot tub, investigators said. An autopsy by the State Medical Examiner's Office concluded Monday he had died from accidental drowning, with heart disease as a contributory factor. Now, if that wasn't suspicious enough, 2 days later, former Alaskan Senator Ted Stevens was killed in a plane crash. Now, he was 86 years of age. He'd been a senator of Alaska for a long time, I think about 40 odd years. And he'd retired at the previous elections. Now, Alaska is owned by BP. Okay, everyone knows that BP have the pipeline, because obviously they've messed that up a few times. They have the pipeline that runs across Alaska. But originally, it was Amoco, an American oil company, that was drilling on the western side of the North Slope. Then BP got licensed to drill on the eastern side of the North Slope. And then BP bought Amoco. So Alaska was BP. So everybody who was living in Alaska either worked for the state government or directly or indirectly for BP. Senator Ted Stevens was effectively BP's representative in Washington. When BP had the massive oil spill because of non-existent maintenance on the Trans-Alaskan pipeline, their liability was mitigated thanks to the very strong representation offered by Senator Ted Stevens in the Senate. Anyway, about a week or so before Matt Simmons took a hot tub, Ted Stevens announced that he was going to bequeath all of his personal and political papers to the University of Alaska for posterity. A day after he made that announcement, BP announced that they were donating $1 million so that Senator Ted Stevens' papers could be properly catalogued. A euphemism for shredded. And then 2 days after Matt Simmons dies, Senator Ted Stevens goes. And I'm sure some of you are also aware that a week ago, a guy called Jim Black also was killed in a plane crash, and this is the guy that was responsible for heading up the cleanup operation. So what did he know? In this newsletter, I asked the question, is there a BP-sponsored hit squad on the loose, taking out those people who know a little bit too much? Because if anybody is any doubt that what is going on here is a very, very significant event, it is a population reduction event. These guys spell out their agenda in tablets of stone. The Georgia Guidestones. If you haven't heard of the Georgia Guidestones before, please go Google it. This is a henge in Elbert County, Georgia. It appeared mysteriously in 1982. I mean, these are massive. These things are 20 odd foot tall. And in 8 modern languages and 8 ancient languages are the goals and objectives of the New World Order, i.e. those who believe themselves to be the rightful rulers of a planetary fiefdom. Please go look at it and go look at what they list as their goals and objectives. I'm going to share 3 with you.